The Vietnam War was one of the most controversial conflicts of the 20th century. But why did it happen, and what lessons did the world learn from it? Join us as we journey back in time to understand this pivotal moment in history, exploring its origins, its brutal realities, and its enduring legacy. This isn't just a story of battles. It's a profound lesson in geopolitics, human resilience, and the complex costs of war. Our story begins not in the 1960s, but much earlier, in the rich lands of Southeast Asia. For centuries, Vietnam was a vibrant, independent nation, but by the late 19th century, it fell under the control of France, becoming part of French Indochina. This colonial rule brought economic exploitation and cultural suppression, sparking a deep-seated desire for independence among the Vietnamese people. During World War II, a new power emerged, Japan. They occupied Vietnam, weakening French authority and further fueling nationalist sentiments. It was during this period that Ho Chi Minh, a charismatic leader and communist revolutionary, organized the Viet Minh, a nationalist movement dedicated to liberating Vietnam from foreign rule. He saw an opportunity for self-determination. After Japan's defeat in 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnam's independence, envisioning a unified communist nation. However, France, eager to reclaim its colonial empire, refused to recognize this declaration. This led to the First Indochina War, a brutal struggle between the French and the Viet Minh that lasted nearly a decade. The Viet Minh, employing effective guerrilla tactics, ultimately triumphed at the decisive Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, forcing France to withdraw. The end of French rule brought not peace, but division. The 1954 Geneva Accords temporarily split Vietnam at the 17th parallel, creating North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh's communist government, and South Vietnam, intended to be a non-communist state. Crucially, the accords also called for nationwide elections in 1956 to reunify the country. However, these elections never happened. The United States, deeply entrenched in the Cold War and fearing the spread of communism, a concept known as the domino theory, believed that if Vietnam fell to communism, other Southeast Asian nations would follow. They supported the creation of an independent South Vietnam, backing its leader, Ngo Dinh Diem, who was staunchly anti-communist but increasingly authoritarian. The division solidified, transforming Vietnam into a proxy battleground in the global ideological struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. In the South, opposition to Diem's government grew, leading to the formation of the National Liberation Front, NLF, often referred to as the Viet Cong. This communist-backed insurgency, supported by North Vietnam, aimed to overthrow the South Vietnamese government and reunify the country under communist rule. Initially, U.S. involvement was limited to financial aid and military advisors, a policy that began under President Eisenhower and continued under President Kennedy. However, the situation in South Vietnam deteriorated, with the Viet Cong gaining strength and Diem's government struggling to maintain control. The U.S. commitment deepened, driven by the fear of communist expansion. A pivotal moment arrived in August 1964 with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where U.S. naval vessels reported attacks by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. While the details remain controversial, this incident provided President Lyndon B. Johnson with the justification to dramatically escalate U.S. involvement. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting the president broad authority to use military force in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. Soon, U.S. ground troops were deployed, and massive bombing campaigns like Operation Rolling Thunder began targeting North Vietnam. The conflict transformed from an advisory role to a full-scale war, with hundreds of thousands of American soldiers fighting alongside the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN. The U.S. aimed to defeat the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, NVA, through superior firepower and technology, but they faced an elusive and determined enemy. The Vietnam War was unlike any conflict the U.S. had fought before, presenting immense challenges for soldiers and civilians alike. For American troops, the dense, unforgiving jungle environment was a constant enemy, filled with booby traps, hidden tunnels, and an invisible foe. The psychological toll was immense, as soldiers grappled with the moral ambiguities of a war where the front lines were often indistinguishable from civilian areas. The North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong, on the other hand, were masters of guerrilla warfare. They used their intimate knowledge of the terrain, intricate tunnel systems, and a deep commitment to their cause to frustrate and outmaneuver the technologically superior American forces. Their resilience and determination were formidable, making conventional military victories difficult to achieve. For the Vietnamese civilians, life was a constant struggle for survival amidst the conflict. They endured relentless bombing, displacement from their homes, and the ever-present danger of being caught between warring factions. The war inflicted unimaginable suffering, tearing families apart and leaving a lasting scar on the landscape and the people. The human cost was staggering, affecting every aspect of daily life. By the late 1960s, despite massive U.S. military presence, the war seemed to be at a stalemate. A major turning point came in January 1968 with the Tet Offensive. During the Vietnamese New Year, Tet, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a coordinated series of surprise attacks across South Vietnam, striking major cities and even the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Militarily, the Tet Offensive was a defeat for the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, who suffered heavy casualties. However, it was a profound psychological and political victory. It shattered the American public's belief that the war was nearing an end and exposed the government's optimistic claims as misleading. Public opinion in the U.S. began to turn sharply against the war. President Richard Nixon, elected in 1968, promised peace with honor and began a policy of Vietnamization, gradually withdrawing U.S. troops while training and equipping the South Vietnamese Army to take over the fighting. Despite this, the war expanded into Cambodia and Laos, further fueling anti-war protests at home. Finally, in January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, leading to the complete withdrawal of U.S. combat troops. The departure of American forces did not bring lasting peace to Vietnam. The Paris Peace Accords proved fragile, and fighting between North and South Vietnam quickly resumed. Without direct U.S. military support, the South Vietnamese Army struggled to hold back the determined North Vietnamese offensive. The U.S. Congress, reflecting public sentiment, was unwilling to re-engage militarily. In the spring of 1975, North Vietnamese forces launched a final, decisive offensive. City after city fell, and the South Vietnamese government collapsed. On April 30, 1975, North Vietnamese tanks rolled into Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. The iconic images of helicopters evacuating Americans and South Vietnamese from the U.S. Embassy rooftop marked the dramatic end of the war. Saigon was renamed Ho Chi Minh City, and Vietnam was officially reunified under communist rule. After decades of conflict, the country was finally whole, but at an immense cost. The war had claimed millions of lives, both military and civilian, and left Vietnam devastated. The long struggle for independence and reunification had finally concluded, but the scars of war would endure for generations. The Vietnam War had a profound and lasting impact far beyond its borders. In the United States, it sparked an unprecedented anti-war movement, challenging government policy, societal norms, and the very fabric of American life. Protests, draft resistance, and civil unrest became commonplace, highlighting deep divisions within the nation. The war also marked a turning point in the relationship between media and conflict. Television brought the brutal realities of war directly into living rooms, shaping public perception and often contradicting official narratives. This living room war fueled skepticism and distrust in government, a legacy that continues to influence public discourse today. Globally, the Vietnam War influenced foreign policy, military strategy, and international relations. It demonstrated the limits of military power against a determined insurgency and highlighted the complexities of Cold War proxy conflicts. The war's legacy includes the Vietnam Syndrome, a reluctance to commit U.S. troops to prolonged foreign interventions, and a renewed focus on the human cost of conflict. It taught us that even the most powerful nations can face insurmountable challenges when confronting a deeply motivated people fighting for their homeland. The Vietnam War was a complex and tragic chapter in human history, filled with difficult choices and profound consequences. It teaches us invaluable lessons about the dangers of ideological rigidity, the limits of military intervention, and the immense human cost of conflict. It reminds us to critically examine the justifications for war, to understand the perspectives of all parties involved, and to never underestimate the power of a people fighting for self-determination. As we reflect on Vietnam, let us remember the millions of lives lost, the sacrifices made, and the enduring impact on all who lived through it. Let its lessons guide us toward a future where diplomacy, understanding, and peace prevail over the devastating realities of war. What are your thoughts on the Vietnam War's legacy? Share your insights in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more historical explorations.